The winter taiga stretched endlessly, like a frozen ocean of silence. Snow fell heavily that day, swallowing every sound, every trace of life, every hope of warmth. A narrow wooden sled creaked through the forest path, pulled by a tired horse struggling against the biting wind. Inside sat two small twins, wrapped in thin blankets that were no match for freezing cold. Their names were Artyom and Ilya, only 7 years old. Their cheeks were pale, lips trembling, eyes wide with confusion. They could not yet understand. Behind the sled walked their stepmother, Katerina. Her face was cold, not from the weather, but from something deeper, something hardened long ago. She didn't speak a word, not to the children, not to herself. Only the wind answered her silence. The village had been struggling for months. Food was scarce, firewood even scarcer. And Katerina had made a decision she justified in the darkest corner of her mind. 2 extra mouths meant 2 less chances for survival. The forest ahead was not just any forest. It was the winter taiga, a place where even grown men disappeared without a trace, a place villagers spoke about only in whispers. The sled finally stopped. The horse huffed, refusing to move further. Katerina stepped down slowly, her boots sinking deep into the snow. She looked at the twins. Artyom held his brother's hand tightly. "I'm scared," Ilya whispered. Artyom didn't answer, but his grip tightened. Katerina turned away for a moment, just a moment. That was all it took to change everything. When she looked back, her decision was made. "This is where you get off," she said flatly. Artyom blinked. We can walk back home, right?" No answer. Only the wind answered him. She pulled their small bundle from the sled and dropped it into the snow. Then she turned away. The horse moved. The sled creaked forward, and the twins were left behind, standing alone in the white emptiness, watching the only world they knew disappear into the storm. Part 2, the forest that swallowed sound. The silence after the sled vanished was heavier than the snow itself. Ilya began to cry almost immediately. Artyom stood frozen, as if moving would make it real. The trees around them were tall, dark, and endless. They looked like frozen giants watching silently. "Brother, she will come back, right?" Ilya asked between sobs. Artyom wanted to believe it. He really did. But something deep inside him already knew the truth. "She told us to get off," he whispered. A distant howl echoed through the forest. Ilya stopped crying instantly. The sound didn't feel like an animal. It felt like the forest itself was speaking. Artyom grabbed his brother's hand. "We walk," he said firmly. "Where?" Ilya asked. "Anywhere away from here." They stepped forward into the snow. Each step was heavier than the last. The wind grew stronger, as if the forest didn't want them to leave. Branches snapped somewhere deep inside the trees. Then silence again. Too much silence. After what felt like hours, their small bodies slowed. Their legs grew numb. Their vision blurred with falling snow. And then they saw something. A shape, not human, not animal. Something in between. Standing between 2 frozen pine trees. Watching them. Ilya pulled back instantly. "Artyom, what is that?" Artyom squinted through the snow. The shape didn't move, but it didn't disappear either. Slowly it stepped forward. And that was when everything changed. Because what they found in the winter taiga was not what anyone could have expected. It was something the forest had been protecting for a very long time. The shape between the trees did not rush. It did not attack. It simply watched. The twins stood frozen, their breath turning into small clouds that vanished instantly into the storm. Artyom tightened his grip on Ilya's hand until it hurt. But neither of them let go. The figure slowly stepped forward again. Snow clung to it like armor. Its outline became clearer with every step. Not a beast, not a man in the usual sense either. It wore heavy fur, stitched from different animals of the taiga. Its face was partially covered by a carved wooden mask, cracked from age and frost. Only its eyes were visible, and those eyes were not wild. They were human. Ilya whispered without thinking, "Are you going to eat us?" The figure stopped. For a long moment, there was only wind. Then, unexpectedly, a voice came, low, rough, but calm. You are too small to survive this forest alone. Artyom stepped slightly in front of his brother. Who are you? He asked. The figure tilted its head, as if the question itself was unfamiliar. I have had many names, it said. None that matter anymore. The wind howled louder, shaking the trees. The twins shivered violently now, their strength fading fast. The figure looked at them for a long moment. Then it turned slightly, as if listening to something deeper in the forest, something unseen. Come, it said finally. Ilya shook his head immediately. No, we don't know you. Artyom hesitated. Every instinct told him to run, but there was nowhere to run to, only deeper snow, or freezing death. The figure turned back toward them. I did not ask you to trust me, it said, only to survive. Then it stepped aside and revealed something behind the trees. A faint glow, not fire exactly, something warmer, something alive. A small shelter made from snow-packed logs and animal hides, hidden perfectly between the trees. Smoke rose gently from a hidden vent. Artyom blinked in disbelief. Someone lives here, he whispered. The figure nodded once. Only when the forest allows it. Ilya's teeth chattered violently. I'm cold. That single sentence broke Artyom's hesitation. He pulled his brother forward. They followed, inside the hidden shelter. The moment they entered, warmth hit them like a wave. It wasn't comfortable warmth. It was survival warmth. Fire burned inside a stone pit in the center. Hanging above it were dried herbs, animal bones, and tools carved from wood and bone. The twins stared in silence. The figure closed the entrance carefully behind them, blocking the storm outside. For the first time since the sled stopped, there was no wind, only crackling fire. Ilya collapsed on the ground immediately, exhausted. Artyom stayed standing, watching everything carefully. The figure removed its mask slowly. Underneath was an older man. His face was marked by deep scars, not from violence, but from survival. His beard was gray-white, blending almost perfectly with the snow outside. You should not have survived the first hour out there, he said quietly. Artyom swallowed. People survive, he said. The man gave a faint, almost sad smile. People survive where the forest permits it. Ilya looked up weakly. Why did you help us? The man looked into the fire for a long time before answering. Because someone once left me in this same forest. Silence fell again. But this time it was different. It was not empty. It was heavy with history. Artyom stepped closer to the fire. Who are you, really? The man exhaled slowly, then spoke a name that made no sense to them yet. A keeper of those of forest refuses to forget. Outside, something moved between the trees. Slow, deliberate, watching. The man noticed immediately. His expression changed for the first time. Not fear. Concern. They found you quickly, he said. Artyom turned sharply. Who found us? The man stood up and reached for a carved spear near the fire. And then he said the words that changed everything. The forest is not the only thing you were left in. The fire inside the shelter suddenly felt smaller. Not weaker, just less safe. As if the warmth itself had been noticed from outside. The old man stepped closer to the entrance, gripping his carved spear tightly. His eyes narrowed. Outside, the snowstorm had not slowed, but something else had joined it, a presence. Artyom noticed it first, a soft scratching sound against wood, not random, not animal movement, deliberate, like something testing the shelter. Ilya pressed closer to his brother, trembling again. What is it? He whispered. The old man didn't answer immediately. He was listening, not just with his ears, with everything he had learned from surviving this forest. Then he spoke in a low voice. Do not look outside when it comes closer. Artyom frowned. Comes closer? The fire flickered violently. For a split second, the shadows in the shelter stretched unnaturally long, then returned to normal. But something had changed. The air felt watched. The first revelation of the forest. The old man finally moved away from the entrance and returned to the fire. He looked at the twins carefully now, as if seeing them differently than before. You are not just lost children, he said. Artyom stiffened. What do you mean? The old man hesitated, then spoke like someone reopening an old wound. This forest does not take people randomly. Ilya shook his head immediately. We were left here by our stepmother. The old man nodded slowly. I know. Silence fell again. Even the fire seemed quieter. Artyom stepped forward. You know her? The old man didn't answer directly. Instead, he picked up a piece of carved wood from the ground. It was shaped like a symbol, circular, with marks etched into it like claws. This symbol, he said, has appeared near every child the forest has accepted. Artyom stared at it. What does that mean? The old man looked at him sharply. It means your abandonment was not the beginning. A long pause. Then the words came. It means the forest was already expecting you. Ilya shook his head quickly. No, that's not possible. But Artyom didn't speak. Something about the way the man said it felt too certain, too practiced, as if this wasn't the first time he had said it. Outside the shelter, the forest moves. A deep cracking sound echoed outside, like ice breaking under impossible weight. The old man immediately stood again. Stay behind me, he ordered. Artyom pulled Ilya back instinctively. The fire dimmed slightly as if reacting to the cold outside creeping in. Then silence, not even wind. That was worse, because in the taiga, silence was never natural. The old man leaned closer to the entrance gap. For a brief moment, he looked outside. Then his entire body went still. Artyom noticed it immediately. What do you see? He asked quietly. The old man didn't move, didn't blink. Then, in a voice lower than before, he said, It is not here for me. A pause. Then he corrected himself. It is here for them. Ilya grabbed Artyom's sleeve tightly. I don't like this place. Artyom nodded slowly. Neither do I. But they were already inside it, and the forest did not let go easily. The second truth, why they were left behind. The old man turned back to the twins, urgency rising in his voice now. Tell me everything you remember before she brought you here. Artyom frowned. She said we were a burden. The old man shook his head sharply. Before that, Ilya thought harder, then spoke softly. She always used to talk to someone at night. Artyom nodded suddenly. Yes, I heard it too. The old man's eyes narrowed. What kind of words? Artyom hesitated. She said we had to be separated when the time comes. The fire snapped loudly. The old man exhaled slowly. So it has begun. Artyom stepped forward. What has begun? The old man looked at him directly. Your stepmother did not abandon you because she wanted to. A pause. She abandoned you because she was told to. Silence. Even the storm outside felt like it paused for a second. Ilya's voice cracked. By who? The old man looked toward the dark forest again and answered with a single word. The forest itself. A sound from the dark. Something moved right outside the shelter. This time, all three of them heard it clearly. Slow footsteps in snow. Stopping just beyond the firelight. Not circling. Not random. Waiting. Artyom slowly reached for a wooden stick near the fire. The old man raised his hand immediately. No. Artyom froze. The old man whispered, If you acknowledge it directly, it becomes real inside. Ilya shook his head, terrified. That doesn't make sense. But the old man didn't argue. Instead, he spoke quietly. In this forest, belief is permission. A soft tapping came from the wall. Once, twice, then stopped. The fire dimmed again, and outside, something exhaled. The tapping on the wall stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt aware. Inside the shelter, the fire flickered lower, as if Eve was trying to listen. Artyom stood still, gripping the wooden stick, but not lifting it. The old man's hand remained raised, frozen in warning. Ilya pressed his face into his brother's coat, refusing to look at the walls. Outside, nothing moved. And that was exactly what made it terrifying. The thing behind the walls. The old man slowly exhaled. Do not react, he whispered. Artyom's voice barely came out. What is it doing? The old man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped toward the wall where the sound had come from. He placed his palm against the wood. A long pause followed. Then he whispered something under his breath. Not a prayer, not a curse, A recognition. Artyom watched closely. What did you say? The old man turned slightly. It remembers you. Ilya lifted his head. That thing outside knows us? The old man's expression tightened. Not that thing. A pause. The forest uses many forms. The fire cracked loudly, and for a brief second, Artyom thought he saw movement in the shadows behind the old man. But when he blinked, it was gone. The truth about the old man. The old man walked back to the fire and finally sat down. For the first time, he looked tired, not physically, but like someone carrying years of unseen weight. I have been called many things, he said slowly. Watcher, keeper, madman. He looked at the twins. But I was once something simpler. Artyom frowned. Who are you really? The old man looked at the fire, then answered, I was one of the children left before you. A heavy silence dropped. Ilya blinked. You were abandoned too? The old man nodded. Long ago, in a winter not different from this one. Artyom tightened his grip. And you survived like us? A faint, bitter smile appeared on the old man's face. I did not survive. A pause. I was kept. The words didn't make sense at first, but something in his tone made Artyom uneasy. The forest does not forget children. The old man leaned closer to the fire. When children are left in this forest, he said, they do not always die. Ilya whispered, what happens to them? The old man looked at him directly. The forest decides. Artyom shook his head. That's not possible. It's just trees and snow. The old man's eyes sharpened. That is what everyone outside believes. A long pause. Then he added quietly, until the forest calls their name back. Outside, the wind suddenly stopped. Completely. No movement. No sound. As if the entire world was holding its breath. The stepmother's true role. Artyom stepped forward. If the forest chooses, then what about her? The old man's expression changed. He didn't answer immediately. Then he said something that made the air feel colder. She did not choose to leave you. Artyom froze. What? The old man continued. She was instructed. Ilya shook his head quickly. No, she hated us. The old man nodded slowly. Yes. A pause. That was part of it. Artyom's voice cracked slightly. Part of what? The old man leaned forward. The forest does not allow emotional hesitation. A silence. Then he said, to leave children here, the one who brings them must believe it is necessary. Ilya whispered, so she was made to believe it? The old man nodded. And after that, she stopped being fully herself. Artyom felt something twist inside him. Where is she now? The old man looked at the fire, still walking. A pause. But not alone. Outside, the nameless presence returns. A slow, dragging sound echoed outside again, this time closer, not at the walls. At the entrance, the old man stood immediately, his voice sharpened. Do not speak. Do not move. Artyom pulled Ilya behind him instinctively. The fire flickered violently. And then, a whisper, soft, almost familiar, coming from outside the entrance. Artyom, Ilya froze. Artyom's eyes widened. That's not possible. The old man's face turned grim. It is not your mother speaking. The whisper came again. Come out. The fire dimmed further. Artyom's breathing quickened. That voice. I've heard it before. The old man grabbed his shoulder firmly. Do not answer it. The whisper stopped. A long silence followed. Then something pressed against the door. Slowly, deliberately, not forcing, just waiting, as if it knew they would eventually open it themselves. The pressure on the door did not increase. It simply stayed there, patient, as if time meant nothing to whatever stood outside. Inside the shelter, no one spoke. Even the fire seemed uncertain now, its flames shrinking and stretching without rhythm. Artyom stood in front of Ilya without moving, like a shield that knew it was already broken. The old man kept his hand on the wall, listening. Then he spoke quietly. It is not trying to break in. Ilya's voice barely came out. Then what is it doing? The old man's answer was colder than the storm. It is waiting for permission. A silence followed that felt heavier than the snow outside. The voice that knew their names. The whisper came again, closer this time. Artyom, then a pause. Ilya. Both twins froze, not because of fear alone, but because the voice said their names correctly. No hesitation. No mistake. The old man stepped forward slowly, positioning himself between the door and the children. His voice turned firm. You are not welcomed here. A moment passed. Then, from outside, a new voice responded. But it wasn't just one voice anymore. It was layered, like multiple people speaking through the same breath. You brought them here. The old man's jaw tightened. I protected them. A faint, almost amused pause followed. From us? The fire flickered violently, and for a second, the shelter walls seemed to breathe. The door opens itself. The wooden door creaked. Not pushed, not forced, just unlocking itself slowly. Artyom stepped back instinctively. No, he whispered. The old man raised a spear, but did not strike. Do not look directly at it when it enters, he warned. Ilya grabbed Artyom's sleeve tightly. I don't want to see it. The door opened fully. Cold air poured in, and something stepped inside. At first, it looked like a man, tall, covered in frost. But the shape kept shifting slightly, like it couldn't decide what form it should hold. Its face was almost human. Almost, but wrong in ways the mind struggled to understand. And then it smiled. That was the worst part, because it wasn't a smile of hunger. It was recognition. The truth of the twins. The old man spoke first, voice steady but tense. You should not be here. The entity tilted its head slightly. And yet they are. It looked at the twins. Artyom felt his body go cold in a different way now. Not from the air, from recognition. The entity raised a hand slightly. You belong to the first cycle. Ilya shook his head quickly. I don't understand. The entity stepped forward, but the old man immediately raised his spear. Stop. It stopped, but only for a moment. Then it spoke again. They were never meant to be abandoned. Artyom's breath caught. The old man's expression darkened. Enough. But the entity continued. The stepmother was not the origin of this. A pause. She was a vessel. Silence hit even the fire stopped moving for a second. The old man's final confession. The old man lowered his spear slightly, not in surrender, but in exhaustion. So it has reached this point, he said quietly. Artyom turned toward him. What does it mean? The old man looked at him for a long time, then spoke. The forest does not only take life. A pause. It corrects imbalance. Ilya shook his head. That doesn't make sense. The old man nodded. It never does at first. The entity outside smiled again. Tell them the rest. The old man closed his eyes briefly, then said the final truth. You were not abandoned by accident. A pause. You were returned. Artyom felt his knees weaken. Returned from where? The old man looked at them with deep sadness. From what you once were before this life. The choice. The entity stepped closer again. The old man raised his hand one final time. Leave them. The entity tilted its head. Or what? A long silence. Then the old man whispered something only the twins could hear. Run when I tell you. Artyom's eyes widened. What? But before he could finish, the old man slammed his spear into the ground. A shock of sound erupted through the shelter. Now! The twins turned instantly and ran toward the back exit hidden behind the firewood. Behind them, the forest inside the shelter erupted into motion, not destruction. Something worse. Awakening. Final moments. As Artyom and Ilya ran into the storm again, the last thing they heard was the old man's voice fading behind them, not in fear, but in release. I stayed long enough. The wind swallowed his words. The forest swallowed the shelter. And the twins ran into the endless white taiga once more. But this time, the forest was not silent. It was calling them back.